Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Cleverly Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. Delicious. Our stuff is still in transit, moving over here to Tempe, Arizona, where we are now located, and that includes all my books, so I'm just working with what I've got. It's beautiful here. You can't go outside because it's over 100 every day, but it's beautiful. No humidity in the heat. That's nice. It's all dry heat, so it's just scorching. But it definitely beats the humidity in Florida and Mississippi. That's for sure. I'll take it. Any folks from Arizona watching? What's up? Today is All the Pretty Horses by the American author Cormac McCarthy, published in 1992. This was a kind gift from my friend and longtime viewer Denis. Thank you very much. He sent me the whole Border trilogy in one hardback. I picked them up separately as well. He didn't send me this copy, but he gets the credit for sure. In a recent Patron-Only AMA that I do once a month, link below, my friend and patron Brandon recently asked me if I'd ever read this, and also whether or not I've ever ridden a horse. The book was queued up on my shelf, and I was like, what the hell, and figured I'd get it done since we were traveling through the South and Southwest, McCarthy territory. Seems like we have a good thing going on with the monthly Patron-Only AMA experiment. Lots of very interesting and insightful questions. It's a good group of folks. Link below if you want to be a part of that, and thank you very much for your support. This was my first time reading All the Pretty Horses, and I avoided it for some time because I had the impression that it was going to be a lighter, more romantic novel than the ones I'd enjoyed from McCarthy, which are typically very dark and intense and violent and epic. I was mostly dead wrong. It is romantic. It is not light. All the Pretty Horses is the novel that made Cormac McCarthy famous, and I suspect it's because he found a way to marry three major elements: the genius dry southern humor that can be found in his book Suttree, the dark existential reflection and godless violence found in Blood Meridian, which was the book he wrote before this one, and a tragic but beautiful romance with mass market appeal. All the Pretty Horses is a manifestation of this holy trinity. And I guess if you wanted to add a fourth, horses. Everybody loves horses. All the Pretty Horses is about a couple of teenage Texan cowboys named John Grady Cole and Lacey Rawlins who run off on an adventure to Mexico in 1949. Cole is the protagonist and Rawlins is his sidekick and often the comic relief. Now in the book, Cole is 16 and Rawlins is 17, but this is a very different time and world. Rawlins behaves like he's 35 and Cole like he's 50. McCarthy, in his late 50s when he wrote this, imbued Cole with what I suspect is much of his sensibility and temperament. So all is fine when they initially head down to Mexico, but unfortunately they're followed by a 13-year-old runaway expert marksman named Jimmy Blevins, riding a horse that Rawlins suspects is definitely not his, and this gets them into trouble. Additionally, Rawlins and Cole find work on a ranch. Cole falls in love with the wealthy Mexican rancher's daughter Alejandra, and the plot thickens. It's a cowboy story, but it's McCarthy, so it's not just a cowboy story, you know? It's a great book for those who are sick to death of the technological modern world. It just wipes all of that away, and you're back there in the mountains, on horseback, eating beans and tortillas. Upon reflection, there's a ton of stuff happening in this narrative. It starts off with a vibe similar to the film The Last Picture Show in small town Texas, and then transforms into this epic, almost mythic odyssey throughout Mexico, filled with adventures and tasks that are sometimes almost Herculean. Not all of it works in my opinion, especially as we get towards the end. It starts to become a bit of a stretch, but the most significant and important parts do. It's a good old-fashioned cowboy survivalist adventure that turns into a heavy coming-of-age story and romance, examining the themes of death, loss, violence, and fate. But above all, perhaps, the mysterious nature of man's relationship with horses, which remains as a constant throughout the book. This elaborate, beautiful question without an answer. The book is filled with the earthy pleasures of rustic living and depictions of admirable self-reliance and purifying loneliness. A wide-open country loneliness, rugged individualism, right? The myth and solitude of the American cowboy. It's a hell of a thing. Mexico and Brazil have similar archetypes. Spain too, I think. Nothing wrong with solitude and self-reliance, but occasionally we all need someone to talk to, even cowboys. John Grady talks to his horse. But if you don't have a horse, I don't have a horse, there are other options, which is why I'd like to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make finding therapy more affordable and accessible. which is helpful because finding the right therapist in person can be challenging, especially given the limited options in your area, especially if you live somewhere rural or in a small town or you travel for work. But unlike many things these days, they make finding a therapist easy because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions online, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist in as little as just a few days. And it's easy to get matched with a therapist. There's a link below in the description. It's betterhelp.com/BTF. Clicking on that link helps support the show, but it also gets you 10% off your first month with BetterHelp, so you can try them out and see if it works for you. And I sincerely hope it does. And because finding the right therapist is a little like dating, if you don't initially fit with your therapist, which is a common thing in therapy, you can switch to a new therapist at any time at no additional cost, without having to worry about health insurance or who's in your network or anything like that. No worries there. So if you're struggling right now, and let's face it, who isn't? Please consider online therapy with BetterHelp. And thanks to BetterHelp for sponsoring the show. McCarthy will use unusual, memorable descriptors. For example, on one page he describes the sky as cyanic, as in cyan, the color. He juxtaposes the familiar with the obscure but appropriate, which makes it memorable. He doesn't do it excessively, he just puts in one or two interesting, antiquated, or obscure words. And that shifts the entire tone or color of the sentence or paragraph. It's very interesting. Additionally, in the novel, McCarthy gives us majestic descriptions of the natural landscape and sunsets. Giving himself away as the author of Blood Meridian, in this book, McCarthy likens sunsets to blood a lot. I got to noticing it, and near the end of the book, I guessed beforehand during a sunset description that the word blood was going to show up, and it did. I was amused. After all, the alternative title of Blood Meridian is The Evening Redness in the West. My friend and patron Lucas said that McCarthy's writing feels very realistic, and I emphatically agree. And I think this is because regarding actions, objects, and spaces, McCarthy is extremely specific. Isolated by themselves, they may appear mundane, but when you put them all together, they evoke something closer to real life. The best part of the book is the examination of man's relationship with horses. John Grady has very little in terms of wealth, but he is a master of horses. One of the coolest parts of the book is learning how horses are broken, ridden, and managed. My wife made a terrific observation in the book, spotting the reference to Hamlet when near the beginning of the book when John Grady picks up the horse skull in the desert and he's staring at it, like Horatio, right? I was embarrassed to have missed that. I was like, damn, should have got that. She ought to be the one reviewing books. The connection John Grady has with horses is visceral and almost unconsciously sexual. Not literally, but in the manner of some kind of ancient primal physical intensity, you know? I'll read you some. There's a fair amount of Spanish in the book too, as Cole is bilingual. The following passage from the book contains both English and Spanish. I don't speak Spanish fluently yet, but I'll do my best. He'd ride sometimes clear to the upper end of the laguna before the horse would even stop trembling, and he spoke constantly to it in Spanish, in phrases almost biblical, repeating again and again the strictures of a yet untabled law. Soy comandante de las yeguas, he would say. Yo solo. Sin la caridad de estas manos no tengas nada, ni comida, ni agua, ni hijos. Soy yo que traigo las yeguas de las montañas, las yeguas jóvenes, las yeguas salvajes y ardientes. While inside the vaulting of the ribs between his knees, the darkly meated heart pumped of whose will, and the blood pulsed and the bowels shifted in their massive blue convolutions of whose will, and the stout thigh bones and knee and cannon and the tendons like flaxen hawsers that drew and flexed at their articulations and of whose will, all sheathed and muffled in the flesh, and the hooves that stove wells in the morning ground mist, and the head turning side to side, and the great slavering keyboard of his teeth, and the hot globes of his eyes where the world burned. That's one of my favorite paragraphs of all time. You know, he's just describing a guy riding a horse. Okay, so you have the physicality of it, right? That sort of strange Freudian horse connection. But then that Spanish segment is very unlike John Grady in the rest of the book, who is normally very moral and level-headed. This is the dark, dominant, immoral, masculine side of him. The one with a powerful, violent will. The part that allows him to break horses, fuck, and kill. Turns out that part of him speaks Spanish. When he's dealing with men, he's a Christian. When he's riding horses, he's a pagan. And who does he sound like? When he says, Sin la caridad de esas manos no tengas nada, ni comida ni agua ni hijos. What does that remind you of? I'll give you a hint with the following quote. Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent. That's Judge Holden in Blood Meridian. And that's the part in the book where John Grady most sounds like the judge. Hence why I say that part of him speaks in Spanish. because you never hear him say anything like that in English, to my knowledge. There's no tonal shift in the book of that magnitude when John Grady is speaking in English. Horses are what allow John Grady to return to nature, Camille Paglia's pagan nature, some deep, ancient, violent, unthinking ecstasy. The ecstasy of Alan Strang with the horse god in Equus. In fact, all things considered, compared to the horses, the doomed relationship with Alejandra isn't really that much of a loss. I mean, who does John Grady steal away in the end? This is a story about men and horses. That's the real relationship of the book. That's the real love story. I never really thought about how unusual the relationship between humans and horses really is, and also how ancient. My wife has informed me that we actually have wild horses real close to us here on the Salt River. You can go see them, and I plan to. I don't know if I've ever lived in an area where there have been wild horses so nearby, so it's an interesting coincidence. It's pretty cool. I'd never seen a wild horse, I don't think. Maybe from a car, but I don't know. I'll report back. The humor is spectacular. One of my favorite lines in the book is when Rollins asks Blevins, "Where'd you get a gun like this?" And Blevins responds with, "At the Gittin' place." I laughed out loud many times. There's nothing quite like droll, dry Southern American humor, of which McCarthy is a master. It's simple, but not easy. I wouldn't at all be surprised if Jim Jarmusch was inspired by it for his film Dead Man, particularly in the scene with Iggy Pop and Billy Bob Thornton, who, as it turns out, went on to direct the adaptation of All the Pretty Horses, which I have not seen and do not plan to because I like Billy Bob and I heard the producers meddled too much. What are you going to do? The book oscillates between heavy, brooding pathos and comedy effortlessly. It somehow remains serious in spite of its own humor, which is tricky, it seems to me, and impressive in terms of writing. For example, after talking about dying and whether or not there's a god, John Grady and Rollins are going to sleep by the fire and are woken up by the sound of coyotes fighting over the entrails of a deer they killed. And Rollins says, "I want you to listen to the sound of that racket," which sounds like a double entendre. Frustration on one hand, obviously, but he also may be saying that is the sound of nature, of the world. And he goes to quiet them down, and he does. And as soon as he lays down, there they go at it again. That's funny, man. You know, like that's this book. In spite of its darkness, it never ceases to have a sense of humor. And the humor adds this layer of reality to the story that makes it feel more real and thus that much more serious. This is a land where coyotes fight over entrails in the darkness. And the cowboy tries to stop them, even though deep down he knows it may be futile. The father element in this book struck me. Cole's dying father and God the absent father, right? The book seems to suggest that both are finally unknowable, reminding us that our direct origins are just as much a mystery as our distant ones. Like Blevins. Nobody knows where he came from. And we'll never know. Where do any of us come from? Nobody really knows. Not really, not the entire story. I think a lot of men think about that. I certainly am one of them. And I think McCarthy was one too. How many of us will never really know our dads, for one reason or another, whether they're still here or passed on. You can sense that heaviness throughout the book. By the end of your life, what are you left with but vague hints of what you're made of? That kind of thing. I recall this being a theme in McCarthy's fiction. I think this was an element in The Passenger as well, wherein the protagonist Bobby's father helped create the atom bomb. That's a hell of an inheritance. It seems plausible that McCarthy caught the whole doomed Southern legacy theme from Faulkner. The doomed romance theme may have come from Hemingway. That whole kind of it is a beautiful relationship and it will not last and there is nothing you can do about it thing. The book is about the idea that, much as we'd prefer the alternative, life has a terrible way of telling you tough shit. It's merciless. Very cruel indeed. Some make it through, but reason and compassion are man-made. The book shows us that it is better to be strong, because then you at least have a chance. But you never have a guarantee. That's what Christianity is good for, and we could probably extend that to organized religion in general, although that tends to go off and have its own issues as well. But hey, to each their own, you know? McCarthy strikes me as an atheist who deeply appreciates the Christian religion in terms of its poetic wisdom, but can't quite get there in terms of its faith or belief. As much terrible stuff as John Grady goes through in the novel, not once do you ever get the sense that he thinks of himself as a victim. There is such a strong sense of resourcefulness and self-sufficiency in his character, it's striking. He's really the paragon of the archetypal, mythic gentleman cowboy, right? He's like the grand ideal, like impossible, basically. When John Grady tells Rollins that he doesn't care about the pain Rollins is in when they're in prison, that's a cold, hard line. A powerful suck-it-up moment because John Grady knows that's the only way they're going to live through this thing. The thing about McCarthy is that he portrays the god-awful hardship of life without whining. It's a delicate balance. That's what makes him powerful. McCarthy does not lie about the nature of the world. He observes, and he tells it to you straight up. But he does not complain. Not once in all the novels I've read by him can I recall a character sincerely begging the reader for sympathy. Not once. Whining and complaining have their place in literature, for sure. It's called France. And I complain about the smallest stuff in my world of modern comforts. I suspect it's because there's a massive quantity of real life that we do not experience in the modern world, which manifests as a kind of neurotic petulance, but then we're kind of drifting into the realm of Uncle Ted, aren't we? Well, he wasn't wrong about everything. But then again, I'm not clambering to work on an oil rig, Anybody watching from an oil rig? Cheers. The book is about coming to know life through death. I think life really begins with the awareness of death, and the book shows us that life itself is almost as unknowable and mysterious as death. Some questions are answered, but definitely not all of them, and definitely not to anybody's satisfaction, I'd say. The most fascinating character in the book for me was Alejandra's great aunt, Alfonsa, who lived through the Mexican Revolution and transforms the book into historical fiction when she tells John Grady the story of her romantic relationship with Gustavo Madero, giving us context. The Madero family was involved in the beginning of the Mexican Revolution. If you know your Mexican history, you'll know how that story ends. Horrifically, understatement. It's one of the most brutal parts of the book. And the worst part is, it's true. More so even than John Grady, Alfonsa is the mouthpiece for Cormac McCarthy. I could hear that woman's voice when I read her. She sounded like an older Lauren Bacall or Eartha Kitt. He's kind of cheating by giving you an expository oral monologue by a single character, but it's the only time in the book where he really does that, so it worked. I thought it worked fine. It was okay. So what did I dislike? McCarthy primarily has two writing styles in this book. Short screenplay-like dialogue, and long paragraphs composed of run-on sentences, all of them conjoined by the word and. It gets tiring after a while, I gotta admit. Maybe I'm just getting old, but it felt like I was desperately squinting, trying to keep my place in these gargantuan paragraphs of and. And I'm just like, Jesus, man, let the sentence die already. Let it die! Then again, there are some terrific passages, like the one I read, so, I wouldn't change that for the world. It makes the whole reading experience worth it, but still, man, it took so much longer than I anticipated. Normally, McCarthy, not going to take me a tremendously long time, or so I thought. Not the content, but the style started to irritate me after a while. And it's chock full of cowboy cliches and all the McCarthy tropes you can think of, so, everything that comes with that. I feel as though I've got a pretty solid grasp on his authorial shtick at this point. Solemn tone, insert 18th century and or obscure word paired with a biblical metaphor or pithy commentary on the nature of man. If you can stick the word blood in there, by all means do so. It leaves me less impressed than when I was younger, but that's only because of the pattern recognition that comes after reading the shit out of his novels, because I'm still very much a fan. I mean, the guy was a deep loss for American literature. He was a terrific author, man. Better than food. Solid 4 out of 5 coffees, leaning towards a 5. I highly recommend it. Not as good as Suttree or Blood Meridian, but honestly, what is? It's better than Child of God, better than The Road, The Passenger, and Stella Maris. There's some absolutely gorgeous writing in there, but you have to kind of be into the whole cowboy western thing to appreciate it, So who should read it? If you enjoy Faulkner, Flannery O'Connor, and Hemingway, check it out for sure. And that's all I've got. Thank you very much to all my patrons on Patreon for helping me keep the show going. I sincerely appreciate it. The link is below if you'd like to help support the show, and thank you very much for doing so. And always remember, die reading.